Well, I hope you're feeling the excitement as we approach the climax of salvation history, the Eucharistic covenant. Before we deal with the Eucharistic covenant directly as our Lord forms it in the upper room in what we call the institution narratives of the Gospels, let's back up to the beginning of the Gospels and allow them to show us how Jesus comes to fulfill all that was best of the covenants of salvation history. Let's begin with Matthew chapter 1. In fact, let's begin with the very first verse, Matthew 1:1. It says, "This is the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham." There, in one verse, Matthew manages to tie Jesus to three great covenants of the Bible. First of all, in the phrase, the book of the genealogy of, which begins his gospel, Matthew is echoing a phrase that occurs only one other place in the entire Bible, and that's in Genesis 5, verse 1. There, the whole sentence is, "This is the book of the genealogy of Adam." Now, any good Jew is going to know that. So when they pick up the Gospel of Matthew for the first time and begin reading, "This is the book of the genealogy of," they are waiting for Adam to fall. Instead, they get Jesus. Right? So what's the point of that? Very clear. Jesus is a second Adam, a kind of new Adam. He's the one to restore that covenant of peace that Ezekiel talked about, that covenant of shalom that calls to mind that peace of Eden where the tree of life and the river of life were available. What is it that Jesus does that replaces the tree of life and the river of life? We'll talk about that in our next segment. But for now, let's just observe. This is the book of the genealogy of, not Jesus, but Adam, tying Jesus to the fulfillment of all that was good of the Adamic covenant. But Matthew goes on, and he says, "the son of David." Notice it's not a son of David. Little known fact, there were lots of sons of David running around in Israel in the first century during the life of our Lord. In fact, the entire towns of Bethlehem and Nazareth were probably all Davidic descendants. But Jesus was not just any descendant of David. He was the son of David. That means the heir, the one that was promised, the seed who would be raised up to build the house of God, as it says in 2 Samuel 7, verses 12 through 14. So, there we see Jesus portrayed then as the heir of David to restore David's covenant. And then Matthew says, "the son of Abraham." Again, all Jews were sons of Abraham. But Jesus isn't just any son of Abraham, not simply a son of Abraham. He is the son of Abraham. That's the promised one, the seed who was spoken of in Genesis 22:18, when God said, "Through your seed," which means descendant, "all the nations of the earth would be blessed." So, in the space of one verse already, Matthew introduces the gospel by showing Jesus as the fulfillment of three of the great covenants of the Old Testament. Then he goes on in his genealogy and proceeds to describe the ministry of our Lord. As we move through our Lord's ministry, we see Jesus doing things like Moses did. Moses went up on a mountain and gave the people a law from heaven. So Jesus goes up on a mountain at the beginning of Matthew 5 and gives people a new law from heaven. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. Our Lord even goes through and corrects some of those compromises and some of that dumbing down of the moral law that we talked about that Moses introduced in Deuteronomy and elsewhere. So Jesus is a new Moses giving new law on a new mountaintop. He leads the people out into the wilderness and feeds them with supernatural bread in the feeding of the 5,000, just like Moses led the people through the wilderness and fed them with the manna. So we see our Lord doing these new Moses things. We see him casting out demons like David did, another new David motif. The climax of all this comes in Passion Week, which is the heart of our Lord's ministry, wherein he indeed forms the new covenant.